Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and a very good day to you. I am Shaheryar Azhar, and we have been in conversation, me and Dr. Pervez Hoodbhoy, on his new book, Pakistan, Origins, Identity and Future. And we are covering the whole book. We have covered 4 parts already, and today we will be recording the 5th part. It is called Looking Ahead, and it has 3 chapters. The first is 3 physical perils up ahead. The second is the paths traveled post 1971, and the last but not the least is replacing the 2-nation theory. So let's just start off with the 3 physical perils up ahead. Dr. Saab, you point to 3 macro challenges or dangers that Pakistan faces. What are they?
First of all, it's a peril that now threatens the entire world. That's climate change. And of course, we are seeing manifestations of that the world over. We're seeing that in the fires in California and in Australia. We're seeing that with rising sea levels, the melting of the ice, both at the north and the south poles. We're seeing dreadful storms, and we're seeing that across the world, agriculture is becoming very unstable. Now, this is just the beginning. If greenhouse gas emissions are not controlled, we know that life on this planet is going to be in deep peril. This is something that was recognized some 30 years ago when the first indications came that there is now a change of temperature, and it comes from the rising amount of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, which are trapping the heat from the sun. So the radiation comes in, but the heat radiation cannot leave the earth. And so left to itself, the temperature of the entire earth would have risen by 4 degrees, 5 degrees centigrade, which would have been catastrophic. Well, because of a growing consciousness on this, and at least not having the same rate of growth of greenhouse gas emissions, that is going to be less. It's not clear how much, but definitely more than 1.5 degrees centigrade. And that means major climatic changes. Now, of course, this is all over the world. You could argue that Pakistan has very little contribution in this. In fact, it has 0.9% contribution. It's not large, small. However, we saw the floods of 2022, which flooded pretty much all the Indus Valley Basin, and it was catastrophic. A year later, we are still to recover from that.
Okay. In terms of Pakistan's, you've been discussing it for the world, but you say that by the end of the present century, the annual mean temperature in Pakistan is expected to rise by 3 to 5 degrees centigrade. That's pretty high.
That's devastating.
That's devastating.
The hottest place in the world was Jacobabad.
In 2019, you're right.
Yes, but now I believe Sibbi is even hotter. And that means that it's going to be impossible to sustain life over there in the decades to come. So we actually, things have moved even faster than climatologists had predicted. The rains that happened were so heavy and so instantaneous that they cause the flooding, but there's also glacier melt. The glaciers in the Himalayas and the Hindu Kush are melting faster. both because of the rise of temperature, but there's also another reason for that. It's the smoke and the soot in the atmosphere. So it's the carbon particles that are being deposited upon the glaciers, and that's causing faster melting. And you can actually see when you go up north that there are big areas that used to be covered by glaciers, and the locals will point out to you that that's where they used to be.
And there's no longer any snow cover there.
There's no snow cover. And now you can ask, well, what can you do about it? After all, it's happening all over the world. It's a catastrophe that's coming.
Right.
Countries are actually preparing for it. So to give you an idea, well, the Dutch, who have always been under the water, after all, a lot of Holland is below sea level. Now, instead of thinking of building bigger dikes, what they're thinking of is having floating cities. So it's not that you can't do anything. You have to be innovative, and well, then you have to put in the resources.
Right.
Okay, now, by the way, we are talking here in Karachi. At the rate at which the sea level is going to rise, there are good parts of Karachi that will be underwater, and parts of Defense Housing Society as well. And those areas reclaimed from the sea are included in that. But this rise in sea level is actually very noticeable as you go into places in Sindh like Badin, where the agricultural land has been totally spoiled by the salt water that comes up. So it's a major, major problem. What can we do about it? It's properly, this should be done on an emergency footing, but it's not. You know how things are in Pakistan.
Right. Just for our viewers, in 2019, you write, when Jacobabad was declared the hottest city in the world, the temperature recorded was 52.8 centigrade. On the sea levels, you write that in the last century, the sea level in Karachi had risen by 10 centimeters and will rise a further 60 centimeters by the end of 21st century. Now, that is extremely significant. Now, of course, we saw last year or a year before the major floods that devastated and inundated about a third of the country or affected a population which was about a third. I think one can do a lot to prevent that kind of flooding if one was to actually allow the water somehow, you will have to create all kinds of passages for the water to merge with either the rivers and back into the sea. With planning, one can do that.
Yes, and indeed the floods of 2022 would not have been so devastating but for the fact that there was the left bank and the right bank outflow canals that take excess water into the sea. They were hopelessly misplanned, and there were embankments along the highways which then stopped the water from flowing. So instead of leaving places for where the water can flow out from, they were all blocked. And so for months that water was stagnant. It bred mosquitoes, flies, and a lot of suffering. Most of the casualties were from that, from disease coming from mosquitoes and the other insects. Now, furthermore, there's another basic issue. The poor always get hit the hardest. So the farmers were able to, the rich farmers were able to buy the authorities, as they always do, and have breaches made so that the water would then flow in the direction of others, and those others would be mostly the poorer ones.
Right.
So there was an intense competition between farmers And the richer ones always win out.
Yeah. I mean, even the poshest area, Karachi, was so badly hit. I mean, tremendous devastation, houses, etc. That today, actually, as we are speaking, most of the defense has been dug up. And they are racing against time that if the next monsoons, which may come in the next 2-3 months, they will be able, Karachi defense at least will be prepared. But let's see, right now it seems they are losing the race against time, but they've really dug up the whole defense. When you travel back and forth, you can see. Okay, so what about the second peril?
That is so obvious. The population is out of control. When you and I were growing up in this city, the population of Karachi was around 1 million people. Today it is probably closer to 24 million. So where there was one person, there are 24 people. Let's look at the national averages. So 1947, the population of West Pakistan is 28 million. East Pakistan is bigger. It's got, I think, 32 million.
At that point.
At that point. Today, that 28 million has become 240, 250 million, and we can't actually do a census properly that's believable either. These are, you could say, guesstimates, and they're constantly being revised upwards. So let's say it's 250 million, that's 250 million people.
About now, 9 times the greater population, or nearly 10 times population of what it was in 47.
Absolutely. Now let's look at the doubling times. So roughly speaking, that doubling time is 25 years, and Pakistan is 75 years. Okay, so 28 million, let's round it off, call it 30 million. 30 million becomes 60 million, which becomes 120 million, which becomes 240 million. Okay, so that's the presence. So 3 doubling times and we get here. Then you ask, what about 25 years later? So 250 million becomes 500 million. 25 years later, 500 million becomes 1 billion. 25 years later, that becomes 2 billion, then 4 billion, then 8 billion. And 8 billion is the number of people on the entire earth today. Now. So all you have to do is wait for 150 years at the present rate of growth, and you'll be there. And what after that? So, this is what is called exponential growth. So it builds on the previous value and then doubles and doubles and doubles and doubles. Now, Pakistan has the highest growth rate in this area of 2.1% presently. Bangladesh has now got to something like 1.2% or something like that. India is also relatively smaller. We've got the highest birth rate in the subcontinent. Now, why on earth has this happened? And we know the answer. We know the fact that family planning has disappeared from the public view. In fact, even the Ministry of Population Planning was dissolved. Right. It was considered too dangerous, too much of a political embarrassment for an Islamic government to have. Right. And so under the pressure of the mullahs.
Right. I would argue we don't have to wait 150 years, because even our 240 million population today is one of the most ill-educated, unhealthy, and unemployed. And on a human development index, we are pretty pretty low, even compared to our South Asian neighbors. So if we can't take care, in a way, or we have failed to take care of the population today, it's very apparent that the population tomorrow will be far worse off.
Absolutely. And have you noticed how overpopulation breeds aggressiveness? Actually, there's a very good lesson to be learned from fish. So this was an experiment carried out a long time ago by ethologists who look at animal behavior. And so first they put a few fish into a tank, and these fish would pass by each other and do nothing except maybe wave their tail as they passed each other. Maybe that was to say hello, hi. Then they put more, and the waving of the tail became less pronounced. No friendly greetings from your fellow fish. And then they started putting in more and more fish, and they reached a point at a certain density of fish, certain number of fish per unit volume, that they started to snap at each other. And so they get, socially, they are no longer friends anymore. They are in competition for space. Not for food, but for space. And that's exactly what you find in terms of traffic behavior. Once upon a time, there were a few cars on the road, right. Almost no motorcycles. And now there are lots of cars, and the place is chock full of motorcycles. And traffic is now becoming an impossibility. Yeah. So the more competition that you have for space, forget food, that's a separate issue. Forget water, that's a separate issue. Space. I just don't understand why there isn't a sense of urgency on this.
Absolutely. You give a very interesting statistic, which I had actually never seen before, and this, you call it the CPR, or the contraceptive prevalence rate, which is the rate of how many couples of in ages where they can breed use contraceptives. Pakistan's rate, you write, is 34.5%. That is 34.5% of those in the sort of the ages of whatever, 18 to 45 or 50, who can actually have children, they use contraceptive when, I suppose, mating or having sex. And now compare this to Iran, which is a theocracy. There the rate is 77.4%, more than double Pakistan's rate. Turkey, another Muslim country, 73.5%. Bangladesh, which used to breed very quickly and faster than West Pakistan, 62.4%. So, I mean, it is remarkable how far we have fallen in population control and awareness and consciousness about what this unchecked population will do to us. Just compare it to a theocracy and a couple of other Muslim countries. I mean, their rates, they are being incredibly rationalist and pragmatic about it compared to us.
You know, the Jamaat-e-Islami, in its manifesto, explicitly denounces family planning. Explicitly denounces family planning, that this is against Islam. And of course, the Jamaat-e-Islami is the most
modern, so-called modern of the religious parties.
It's the most
moderate.
Presently moderate, because now you have the real extremists who are to the far right of them. But when a party has this in its manifesto, and one which was, yes, right-wing, but now is no longer extreme right-wing, then you can see what the future of family planning in Pakistan is. But you know, it's even more than that. We talked about awareness. Now, how babies are produced is a national secret, which we try to hide. If you open a biology textbook, now you will not even find the diagram. Forget pictures. You will not find the diagram for the reproductive system of a rabbit. Forget humans, because this has to show the genitalia, the female and the male. And of course, that goes against our morality. We are such moral people.
Tremendously. Total craziness. I mean, this is madness. Because, I mean, you can't hide from what is.
देखें ना, इसी को कहते हैं मशक़ी शर्म व हया.
Well, this is obviously totally overdone. Bangladesh has controlled population. How? With the help of clergy. I mean, Jamaat-e-Islami and other religious parties should actually go and study that. It is in their mosques on Friday and prayers that they had co-opted the clergy that tells them the benefit of a family that has less children, which is better for all the whole population. And they've done it, the second way they've done it is by tremendously increasing the job opportunities for women, whether to do their own business through microcredit or be part of the workforce. And the very fact that women, when they go into the workforce, their fertility rates or their ability to have more children, they becomes less.
Absolutely. This is such a vital point. Bangladesh does that. You see women on the streets in Bangladesh. You don't see them very rarely in parda. Here, they are mostly in parda. You don't see them working in offices except occasionally. Well, of course, it's the rate has gone up. More women are employed today than, let's say, 50 years ago. But the rate has been far smaller than elsewhere. In Tehran, I sat in a taxi, and this was 20 years ago or so, driven by a woman taxi driver.
Right.
And if they can do it, why can't we do it?
Oh no, absolutely. I mean, our female participation in the workforce rate in the subcontinent, and including Bangladesh and everybody else, is the lowest. I mean, India has dropped for some reason, but is higher than us, and Bangladesh is very high at 33.3% and climbing up. So, well, coming to the third peril, if the first two don't kill us, then there is this third one. And what is that, Dr. Saab?
That is the sword that hangs over us, the nuclear sword. And it's been there for a while. It has, of course, not been used, except that threats of use have been made, and they have been made repeatedly. Now, once upon a time, there was the hope that since both countries have nuclear weapons, that they will resist from ever having to go to war against each other. After all, we did have 4 wars in total, and of course, the first war that happened was in 1999, and it was after the nuclear tests. Now, normally you would think that nuclear weapons bring stability. Here, what happened was that, and I think this is the first recorded instance in history,
that's right,
that nuclear weapons actually caused a war to happen.
Kargil, 1999.
Absolutely. Kargil, 1999. This is when General Musharraf was so confident that India would never dare to attack Pakistan, because Pakistan had just tested nuclear weapons on the 28th of May 1998. And so almost immediately thereafter, the plans for a secret incursion into the Indian part of Kashmir was put into practice. And by the time that January came along, it was in full operation. You see, the snows melted. Actually, it was probably February or March when the troops started going on the other side, disguised, of course. And then we were told that they were Mujahideen, and that now the Indians are in grave difficulty. And this continued. All this while we were pretending that we had nothing at all to do with this. So my point over here is that that nuclear weapons, although they do provide, although they are objects of fear and they do prevent conventional war from happening, yet under their cover, cross-border incursions can happen. And so there's been brinksmanship.
Right. But you see, this is the Kargil just causes such enormous reaction in any rationalist thinking. I mean, what were our generals, what was General Musharraf thinking? We have had America and the Soviet Union in a Cold War on a nuclear standstill, never ever fought directly for the same reason. They assiduously avoided a direct, they fought through proxies, but never directly. And here our generals thinks they can reinvent the wheel. That here we are nuclear, India is nuclear. If we start Kargil, India will not retaliate because they will fear nuclear retaliation from us. Guess what? India says, you're challenging me, now I'm escalating, now you use nuclear weapons first, right? And it put them in a bind. I mean, this is the most low IQ, stupidest, I'm sorry to say, reaction that they had. They used a nuclear umbrella for a conventional war directly with with our nuclear enemy. I mean, how stupid is that?
Yeah, but let me also now fault the Indians. What they did in Balakot, make a deep incursion into Pakistani territory. Now, of course, it turned out that there was not a nuclear war, nor threats, overt threats of this, but certainly this must have led to a much higher level of alert. Now, let me tell you that one cannot ever predict what happens in situations of crisis. So when you have a normal level of alert, well, then the chances are very small that a nuclear weapon will be fired by mistake. One does have, of course, bad incidents like an Indian mid-range rocket found its way onto Pakistani soil. That was a mistake. And if we had an early warning system and fire on detection, that could have led to a tragedy. But okay, once you have the level of tension going up, then a new situation comes about. Then each side feels that it has to be on its toes. Now, when it is on its toes, at that point, the codes for arming nuclear weapons are sent over to the local missile groups, commanders. You can't rely on communications because those communications could be cut off at any moment. So even if you have fiber optics under the ground, the fact is that an electromagnetic pulse could disable all your electronics there. So therefore, you have to give the local codes. The local code is put in by the commander of your TEL, that is Transporter Erector Launcher. And if one missile is fired, if one nuclear weapon is used, then you can expect retaliation of the other side, and then this escalates until all the nuclear weapons are used.
But my point, you're good to point the Balakot problem, because I mean the issue is not that it seems that in subcontinent we can miscalculate massively. I mean, USA and the Soviet Union had a hotline precisely for that purpose, that we can it accidentally start a nuclear war, and how do we try to prevent an accidental or somebody feels, oh, there is a missile from Soviet Union coming into United States, and now I immediately retaliate, right? So they had at least another mechanism to have a check and balance against an accidental firing, which was the hotline.
Absolutely. Well, they had the hotline, they had satellite systems up in the sky. They could, you can detect missile launches because of the thermal imaging. When a missile goes up, there's a lot of heat that it has to throw out. And so, Pakistan doesn't have that. It will have to rely on something much more primitive, or what the Chinese give to it. The Indians already have some surveillance satellites up in the sky. But the point is that even there are no warning times.
Right.
I mean, it's how long does it take a missile to cross from one side to the other? Barely a few minutes. And I might say, now things have become a little more dangerous than before, because the Indian Army now has a doctrine for nuclear war fighting. Nuclear war fighting is different from deterrence. In deterrence, what happens is that you scare the other side and say, yeah, these nuclear weapons are for the final thing. After that, neither you will exist or we will exist. But nuclear war fighting is that, oh, I will use nuclear weapons in a tactical mode. And actually, Pakistan is doing that with the Hataf missile. Range of only 60 miles or so, 80, 90 kilometers.
Right.
Small yield nuclear weapons, which are much more dangerous, because suppose an Indian tank formation is coming towards Pakistan, and to stop that, Pakistan uses a nuclear missile, a Hataf missile. Well, that constitutes a nuclear attack in the eyes of the Indians. In fact, the Indians have made clear their nuclear policy. They say that if a nuclear weapon is used against us, whether on Indian soil or on Pakistani soil, it will be construed as a nuclear attack. Okay, then all bets are off. Then we don't know what's going to happen after that.
I think you were right. I mean, without Kargil, number one, which then led to, in a way, India rethinking its no first use strategy, what the Indian Defense Minister said a couple of years ago. And now with Pakistan's trying to have this so-called tactical nuclear weapons of low range missiles, I think the nuclear threat it definitely is up there with in the three perils as a result of that.
But we've stopped talking about it. You see, we've become so comfortable with nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons are like the furniture in the house, like the sofas. You don't even notice that they're there, and yet they've not. Their lethality goes up every year as we add more and more nuclear weapons to the stockpile, both India and Pakistan. It's totally crazy.
Right. I'll add another dimension to this. When very poor countries, like which Pakistan is, have nuclear weapons, the misery index, so to speak, in the population is so high that when your misery index is high, fatalism is also very high. I mean, then it becomes even less, the ability to rationally act becomes less in a very poor countries, because I'm just putting a hypothesis, the high misery index, high fatalism, and then you say, come what may, I mean, life can't be worse than what it is anyway. So, I mean, that kind of calculation.
Yes, and the visceral anger, the visceral hatred,
That's right.
this fatalism, the possibility of accidents. And so we'll be lucky if we survive without nuclear war for another century, but it could be much less than that.
The scientist that you are, which we all forget since you are a public intellectual, mostly also commenting as we know you more often on social and political scenes, but you do what scientist minds they do, which is you do scenario building. And take us through your scenarios of these three perils. How do they play out in the scenarios you have built?
First, let me say that since as yet we have not seen any fundamental change in thinking, that means that the old attitudes and policies will continue, which means that Pakistan will be focused upon countering India and keeping Kashmir alive. And so, since it is its economic prospects are not good, what we will see is a steady slide downwards in terms of quality of life, in terms of what access people have to health and education and public infrastructure, which will keep degrading. So if you were to ask me what lies ahead in the next 20 years, 15 years, whatever, I'll say more of the same, and that's the greatest probability. Now, I know we are in a state of political crisis, but the crisis is between Imran Khan and Nawaz Sharif and the Zardaris to an extent. Neither of them has any solution to this, and so therefore what we expect, that even after the IMF loan comes around this time, there will be just steady degradation in the quality of life everywhere. Now, as the population grows, and it's virtually impossible to now stop Pakistan from becoming 340 million people by 2047, which is when it will be 100 years old. So if one looks at the posh areas which are livable and which are perfectly good, but they are only a few percent of the urban population, that percentage will steadily come down. So instead, what we will see is these islands of affluence with a growing and with an ocean which is intruding onto them, and at the same time becoming deeper. So the depths of human misery will increase. And I'd say that this is the first scenario.
You call it the high to medium probability.
High to medium probability. I'm not going to give numbers on this, but this is the most likely scenario, that things will continue as they are.
May I give the numbers, since you do give them in your book?
Okay, go ahead.
So you say a high to medium probability population crosses 380 million, UN estimate for 2047, serious water air quality crisis, physical separation enforced between those who have water, electricity, jobs. So now we are having populations living in their silos, right? Religious and ethnic communities are at daggers drawn, and etc., etc. Afghanistan under Taliban has a love-hate relationship, and a low-intensity conflict continues. Unemployment, border areas very insecure, inter-provincial travel becomes difficult and risky. I mean, that's a pretty scary scenario, and you call it your high to medium probability based on...
So I did not give a number on that probability. I didn't say it's 50% or 70%. I'd say it's the most probable. Now, There's a more optimistic scenario, which is that at this point we wake up. So family planning, most important. Make that a national priority. Realize that education, the education we're providing to our children is worthless. Dump the single national curriculum. Teach our kids what kids are taught in the rest of the world. In other words, become a normal country. And then start also preparing for climate change, because that's something that's now unstoppable. Even if the world stops producing carbon dioxide and methane, other greenhouse gases, that climate change is coming. And so we're going to have more floods, we're going to have storms, we're going to have melting glaciers and all that. Prepare for it. There are ways of doing this. Now, you know, one of the biggest things that we need to prepare for is the fact that changing weather patterns are going to destroy agriculture unless we educate the farmer. See, crops are planted expecting that a certain weather pattern will prevail, but now that is changing. Now, to an extent, we can predict what will happen in the next year, what sort of thing to expect. So prepare the farmer for that. There are mitigative ways which are very important. So that's the second scenario. If we implement that, if we do all these things, if we change our foreign policy and make friends with our neighbors instead of being perpetually at war with them, and I don't mean just India, I mean Iran as well. Afghanistan, of course, is a wild card. You don't know where that's going to go. And we must also learn to deal with China in a way that, well, we can't be their equal certainly, but we must stop ourselves from being exploited by them. So if we do all that, then Pakistan has a chance of improving itself. And I'd say that's low probability, but that's where the hope lies.
Right. You call it medium to low, right?
Okay.
Okay, well, seems to me that they say that nations do not change unless they have run out of all options. And it seems, reading these three perils ahead, that actually we have run out of all options. And even if we don't change now, then frankly, there is not going to be much hope left.
Well, actually, I think that the present crisis could be a source of hope, because the ship is sinking and people now for the very first time are asking the right questions, and for the very first time have summoned the courage to question the establishment. The holy cow is now no longer that holy. Of course, there's still certain things that you can't say and which need to be said, but it's a sign of hope,
right,
in that way.
And our leaders will have to get over their high horses and egotistical zero-sum positions and have to come talk to each other, genuinely mode of compromising and devising win-win solutions for everyone rather than winner-takes-all kind of mentality.
Yes, although I think even if they start talking to each other, that's for their own personal good. They're still not talking about issues such as health, education, economy, population. That's all they're talking about is, hey, who gets to sit in the driver's seat?
That would be the first step, and then I suppose that.
And there's a third possibility, which I say is very low, but we've got to be afraid of that. I mean nuclear war. And so the sooner we can get rid of these things, or at least start winding them down. I mean, for what do we need 200 nuclear weapons? It used to be said before nukes, and so that's 30 years ago, that all we need is one or two. In fact, General Sundarji of the Indian Army, you know, the one who was responsible for Operations Brass Tacks. Once I happened to meet him in Washington at a meeting, and when I told him I was a nuclear physicist, he assumed that I was the kind of nuclear physicist who likes to make bombs. And so he embraced me. He just he hugged me and said, you know, when that damn thing went off in Pokhran in 1974, I said to myself, Pakistan should have the bomb too. He's a great bomb enthusiast. And he said, all you need is two, and we need two, and we'll be so afraid of each other that we'll never need to have any weapons after that. Okay, great idea. So now, instead of 200, let's wind down.
Right.
Else, possibility number 3, no, okay, but it's going to be there, and it'll be the end of life on this subcontinent.
It's very true that I think Pakistan should feel very secure. It's no longer in a position that India can conquer it. Pakistan itself cannot impose its will militarily on India at all. I mean, we have fallen far behind. Both should realize that this is the reality, and really, as you said, big, serious thoughts about nuclear, if not disarmament, but certain limitations of nuclear weapons, and move on to normalizing their relationship. So, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of the first part of the 3 parts of the last part 5, which is looking ahead, and we will be back with you with the second of the 3 parts very soon in the next episode. Take care and be well.